Hello history geeks. Today we are going to answer a question that we can't answer as much as we humanly can. We are conducting an investigation into history. 1630, Massachusetts Bay Colony, 1,000 Puritan refugees, not a single Quaker welcome, to set the stage. Now, those of you who are not history buffs, in the slightest, and are here for the sake of education and not at your own will, you may already be lost, because terms like Puritans and Quakers might mean zip. Allow me to give you some background. The movement known as Puritanism was a religious group that arose within the Church of England during the late 16th century. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, a shaky peace existed throughout English religious life. This peace continued into the 17th century, where some groups of worshippers called separatists felt so daring, they decided to separate themselves from the main body of their local parish church, the most prominent group being the Puritans themselves. It is important to note that the Puritans would refer to themselves as non-separating Congregationalists. What the heck does that mean? Basically, they didn't view the Church of England as a false church, but in practice, acted exactly as the separatists were acting. Keep in mind, all heretics, another name for the separatists, were tried and executed. Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England, hence their name, but given the circumstances, they had nowhere near enough power to do that. So, the next best option was to migrate. After all, people were already sailing to the New World. 1,000 Puritans migrated to set up gathered churches in a land they called Massachusetts Bay Colony, and those numbers would soar as the years progressed. Once Massachusetts Bay Colony was up and running, to ensure purity in their church, the earlier ministers of the colony became the first to require parishioners to attend a genuine quote-unquote conversion experience in order to become church members. In other words, they took their religion very seriously. Even though these Puritans had escaped from the Society of England and maintained a rigid policy of intolerance of any religion, they still found that sin existed both within and without the church, obscuring their vision of the pure city of God. Better yet, right around the time they came to this realization, a bigger problem had arisen. The Quakers. These guys are great. Known as the Society of Friends, the religious denomination dates back to the late 1640s. It began as a radical movement that would empower individuals and encourage disrespect for prevailing institutions. They believed an educated ministry and a church hierarchy damaged true religion. Instead, they urged believers to look their inner lighter seed. Just by hearing that single sentence alone, I'm already getting that hippie vibe. So, obviously, the response to the Society of Friends was very mixed. True, an official policy of religious toleration protected them to some extent from persecution in the 1650s, that was very short and basically it. As you can imagine, conservatives were very frightened by the Quaker message. Quakers had a very, dare I say, aggressive preaching style. Think long lectures aimed at anyone walked by or at even other worship services of other religious groups. It's easy to see how conservatives were scared by these guys, and not just because they're conservatives. The society, however, did grant a greater role and more authority to women, and embraced the plain style and quietism. So now that all of you are educated on these two very distinctive groups, let's dive into all the commotion they caused. Quakers were drawn to North America for the very same reason the Puritans were, coincidentally. However, they wanted to spread their beliefs among the colonists, whereas the Puritans wanted religious freedom from a theocracy just so that they could go and make their own theocracy and force their beliefs on every member of their colony. So, you can only imagine what kind of relationship these two types of people had. The leader of the Puritans, John Winthrop, did understand that people were bound to disagree and was willing to tolerate a range of free opinion and belief. But, he also recognized that if dissent were not kept within bounds, it would undermine the community. And that is precisely what happened. Puritans would come to expel these dissenters from their colonies, a fate that caused Roger Williams in 1636 and Anne Hutchinson, America's first major female religious leader, in 1638, to be executed. Those who defied the Puritans by persistently protesting their beliefs and the rights they have to spread them, risked capital punishment, something for Quakers between 1659 and 1661 underwent. However, the Quakers eventually took the hint, and George Fox, the man typically identified as the founder of the Quaker movement, formed a colonial site where Quakers could migrate to in order to escape persecution, which later became known as New Jersey. Now, let's get into the heart of the historical debate we are discussing today. Our topic question is as follows. Did the Puritans have justification to persecute the Quakers? Please keep in mind that this question has no legitimate answer, hence what I said in the very beginning of this video. Since we all now have the necessary background meant for looking into this question, let's dive into it. So, the first side of this argument, Puritans had every right to persecute the Quakers. Now you might be under the assumption that the Quakers were good, upstanding citizens who just rebelled in quiet because they were not. The Quakers were in no way meek and mild innocents who wanted to sit down and make peace with their uptight government. They were just as outspoken as the Puritans, and when they first came to Massachusetts, they didn't come quietly. They tried to wreak maximum havoc, bursting into church services, yelling in the streets, banging pots and pans together and even stripping off their clothes. Why, of course, this absurd behavior would be intolerable. If someone in the year 2016 stripped their clothes in a public place, they'd be arrested. On a similar note, in an article published in the New York Times way back in 1899, it was said that though the old Puritans cannot be altogether absolved from the charge of bigotry, they can be freed from the charge of having persecuted the Quakers on account of their religion. Their treatment of the Quakers was dictated by policy rather than bigotry. They did not banish the Quakers because they refused to admire John Calvin and to believe in the eternal damnation of unbaptized infants, but because they were disorderly persons who paraded naked through the streets in a state of religious frenzy and otherwise disturbed the peace. All in all, that's the only main argument you can give to defend the Puritans. After that, if you look at the other facts, it's quite funny how impartial they are to other religions. Alright, so let's now switch sides for a moment and say the Quakers did not deserve to be persecuted. In that same New York Times article, it was said that the few Quakers who got into New England would not have been disturbed if they had minded their own business and obeyed the laws. That may sound like a logical sentence, but if you backtrack, you'll see it is not. The sentence literally starts with the words "the few Quakers who got into New England." It's implying that there were very few Quakers let into the New World in the first place. That is a major problem. Of all Protestant groups, the Quakers went furthest in separating itself from Christianity. They didn't want a theocracy necessarily, but rather a separation between church and state. They could not be coaxed or bullied into paying taxes. They refused to render military service, or to take the oath of allegiance. In these ways they came across as rebellious and criminals to the church and the state. So, in a way, they were wrongly accused when they were just following their own beliefs. It was not to be expected that such opinions should be treated by the Puritans with such dread and temper. Going back to the other side of the argument, remember how I said what illegal acts the Quakers participated in? Well, in no way do they provide the slightest excuse for the cruel treatment of the Quakers. Persecution immediately began, and it was before the newcomers had a chance to behave themselves or leave. Their mere coming to the New World was taken as a sign of invasion. In no way was that in itself justified. However, neither was the ill behavior of the Quakers in the first place. Do you see how the argument can easily have two answers? So, did the Puritans have justification to persecute the Quakers? It depends. Thank you for watching and putting up with this monotone voice that pronounces the word Puritan very strangely. Here are all the sources I used to make this project possible. Until next time.